As a child growing up, I was told stories by my great-great-grandparents. They would take us up to the woods in the summer, and we would spend all summer up there. We weren't allowed to come back down into civilization. Antone, my great-great-grandfather, would give us a rifle, and we were 8 years old at the time, and he said, go out and I want you guys to learn the area, and I want you guys to hunt. It was a lesson that he taught us to go out and learn ourselves, and if we had done anything wrong, then we were corrected. While there, he would also tell us stories of the areas that we would visit. We have many lakes, a couple of rivers, and we have Mount Adams, and he would tell us stories of how they were created. And then he would also tell us stories about Bigfoot. Growing up, it was kind of hard to fathom, why is he telling us stories like this? But as I grew up, I became a skeptic because I didn't know. And then a few years later, working for the Yakama Nation, then that's when everything started happening.
With regard to the subject at hand, Bigfooters, Sasquatch, my wife grew up in Ferndale, Washington, right next to the Lumi Indian Reservation. Where she grew up, there were so many Bigfoot sightings, it was just common. The thought that Bigfoot was a legend, or maybe did it exist or not, never even came up. She was 19 and in college before she met somebody that doubted the existence of Bigfoot, and she was astonished because there wasn't a question, is Bigfoot real? It was just another animal in the woods.
In talking with indigenous people, some of the people will say, the DNA is there. We are related. We are related to the Sasquatch. For them, this is really, it's family. It's a neighbor. It's that connection. It's not different for them.
I read a story by Paul Kane, an artist who wrote a book called Wanderings of an Artist Among North American Indians, and it was published about 1890.
This mountain has never been visited by either whites or Indians. The latter assert that it is inhabited by a race of beings of a different species, who are cannibals, and whom they hold in great dread. These superstitions are taken from the statement of a man who, they say, went to the mountain with another, and escaped the fate of his companion, who was eaten by the skookums, or evil genii. I'd offered a considerable bribe to any Indian, but could not find one hardy enough to venture.
And they would not guide him there, no matter what.
There are competing hypotheses about what Sasquatch is, what its nature is, and I've approached this subject from the perspective of an anthropologist, an anatomist, biologist, and so the evidence that impresses me that suggests the existence of this creature points to it being a large bipedal primate. It's particularly interesting to me due to my interest in the evolution of human bipedalism and sharing that habit with another species of primate living alongside us is a unique and interesting opportunity of comparison and contrast to that adaptation.
We have a being that is in the biological record that is a 10 feet tall, upright walking ape. We have thousands of track casts that Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum collects. We have numerous reports from all kinds of people over many years in the United States, as well as a complete cultural record of all indigenous cultures.
It's the footprint evidence that drew me in. And likewise, many of my scientific predecessors, Dr. Grover Krantz, Dr. John Napier, it was the composite data set of the footprints that compelled them to take this matter seriously. Something, as Dr. Napier said, something is leaving footprints.
The Salish in BC call it Dejunaqua. The Lakota call it Shayatanka. And they don't talk about this being as being separate from us. Matter of fact, a lot of them say it our brother in the forest, and a lot of them will actually explain how there's the fox, the bear, and the Sasquatch. It's not different for them.
How do you feel just sitting here looking over there again right now?
Yeah, it's nuts, man. It really is, dude.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, it's almost breathtaking.
I honestly keep wanting so badly to be like, look, guys, and then everyone can see it, dude. Yeah. But it's never, like, it's killing me right now to be here.
That experience alone, I mean, it changed my life. I'll never be the same.
We came here to do a survival video for our YouTube channel back in 2020, mid-October. We set a camp up on this side of the mountain. We had turned our cameras off, our batteries were running low. We came down here to fish for some dinner. We spent a good half an hour down here on these rocks, just chit-chatting with the line in the water. And
just trying to make ends meet for the night.
Yeah, just trying to get something to eat, trying to get warm, get some food. Austin had noticed a couple animals over here on this log that was in the water, and he kind of punched me in the arm and said, hey man, what are those? And
I was kind of like, hey, you see that over there?
Yeah, we noticed it. I didn't know what to think of it at first. I was thinking maybe a sow and a cub, and I kind of played it off for a few minutes like it's nothing. And the more I looked, the more I seen that it wasn't like a bear. It was more like a
human.
Yeah, it's so hard to explain. I just can't put it in words.
The size of it is just remarkable. I mean, it's larger than any human I've ever seen. As soon as you realize that it wasn't, some kind of animal that you would normally see out here, it kind of just like took everything out of your body, just took your whole breath away, and everything just went silent. You didn't really hear anything but what your thoughts were.
I had a whole career as a wildlife conservationist and ended up working for 27 years for the tribes. Over a very long time, as I earned the trust of the tribes, more and more stories would come my way. More and more information, more and more stories about where Sasquatch were found on the res. And after I became sort of a trusted mascot of the tribe, I got a lot of information just from them about what they are and what they want and where they live. There's a lot of films and photos that are taken that are never shared outside of Indian country. Bigfoot stories are owned by the longhouse that has them, and they do not share with other members of their tribe that are in another longhouse. It's all balkanized within the tribe as far as Bigfoot stories go, because they're considered property that a longhouse owns. It's like a copyright. You can't use that story because they own it, and they don't tell it to anybody else. So an outsider like me, in some cases, has more access to those stories because I am not seen as a threat and not seen as something that you have to compete with. For example, Vancouver Island, the Kwakwaka'wakw, who used to be called the Kwakiutl. That tribe has a lot of Sasquatch contact. They have a secret society called the Hamatsa, which is a hereditary clan where it's the wild man society in the tribe. If you're a member of the Hamatsa, you can put a Zanukwa, which is their word for Sasquatch, at the bottom of your totem pole, because totem poles are read upside down. The thing closest to the ground is the most important totem in the totem pole.
The story poles are influenced by the wild man and the wild woman. There's a relationship there, and it must be a really close relationship. For them, this is really, it's family, it's a neighbor. I asked some of the tribal historians, people that might be in tune or in touch with this information, and I said, who were you emulating with these head shapes? The answer was more than not usually the forest people, the Sasquatch. When you are in touch and in tune with our indigenous communities in the region, you will observe that most of the culture up and down the coast is related to the wild man, the wild woman. A lot of the family crests are related to the wild man, the wild woman. A lot of the ceremonies are related to the wild man and the wild woman. The mask, artistically, the regalia is related to the wild man and the wild woman. I'm not speaking for the Native communities. I don't want to represent them in any way. I really feel that if you want to know more about this through oral tradition or through the stories or culturally, then you need to take the step to do that. If we can really bridge the gap with peoples, we could learn a lot about this topic.
In 1840, there was a missionary that was out in the Oregon Territory. His name was Elkanah Walker. The Native Americans out there were telling him about the giants that would come down, steal their salmon. And he was writing back to his church back on the East Coast, in New England, I believe it was, telling what the Indians were sharing with him and how these giants smelled bad and were very strong and had like 18-inch tracks.
Elkanah Walker, in April of 1840, wrote, "I suppose you will bear with me if I trouble you with a little of this superstition, which has recently come to my knowledge. They believe in the existence of a race of giants, which inhabit a certain mountain off to the west of us. This mountain is covered with perpetual snow. They inhabit its top. They hunt and do all of their work in the night, and they cannot see the daytime. They come to the people's lodges in the night when the people are asleep, and take them and put them under their skins, and take them to their place of abode without even waking. When they wake in the morning, they're wholly lost, not knowing in what direction their home is. The account that they give of these giants will in some measure correspond with the Bible account of this race of beings. They say their track is about 1.5 feet long.
I started in the Bigfoot field in 1956. I was trekking in the Himalaya, a small expedition to look for the Yeti, and made contact with this Texan called Tom Slick, this oil man. He became a very good friend. So to make a long story short, I signed up with him. I spent 3 years in the Himalaya looking for the Yeti. When I came down from that, he invited me to come to the States. He said, you spent enough time up there, come to the States and look for Bigfoot. And I have to say, I laughed. But I came over here and got into the search for Bigfoot. In the whole history of Bigfoot, there's been one piece of footage, 16mm footage, taken by 2 men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. Patterson has died, passed away. I met him, interviewed him 6 times before he died. He came across to me as thoroughly credible. His associate, Bob Gimlin, is a man of great integrity, very much admired. He lives in Washington still. And I believe his story of what happened, the whole thing.
Peter Byrne ran an organization called the Bigfoot Research Project, and I became part of his project. And we paid for a group of scientists to analyze the Patterson film and prove that it was a guy in a gorilla suit. So we dropped about $500,000, and we couldn't do it. We really tried to use pure science and approach it with hard science.
The Patterson-Gimlin film clearly stands as the most compelling photographic evidence that we have to date, even in this age of iPhones and digital cameras and so forth. It still has set the mark so high. And not only do we have the film, but we have a remarkable track record associated with it. The cast that Roger Patterson executed himself on the day of the filming, but also some number of days later, Bob Titmus, a researcher from Canada, came to the scene and made a series of 10 footprint casts that provided a remarkable record. But having the image of the track maker combined with the tracks as an anatomist, as a functional morphologist, I'm as convinced as I can be, short of having stood there on the sandbar on that afternoon and witnessed the event myself. The suggestion that you'd work around the challenge of finding an oversized human male subject by portraying a female falls to the wayside when you scrutinize the specifics of what would have to be a fursuit and someone to fill that fursuit, which is just virtually impossible, especially given the technologies available in 1967. This is a piece of evidence that stands up under remarkable rigor that couldn't have possibly anticipated the technologies that we are applying to it today.
We had a great copy. We could see the muscles moving under the fur with the resolution we had. Everything that we did find in the film suggested it was actual observations of an uncatalogued animal. There's an occipital protuberance on the back of the skull, and it has a point on the back of the skull where all the back muscles attach. It was designed for walking erect, which is a hominid variation. So it's not a primate, it's a hominid.
Going back to the silly question people ask, where would they hide? The Pacific Northwest is enormous. Here we have the Mount Hood National Forest, 1 million acres. Acres that supply the essentials: food, water, cover, and space. Those 4 things which a wild animal requires. When I lived over in the Hood River Valley on my second project, a plane crashed 2 miles from me, a small plane. It took a year to find it. We're dealing with an enormous area which the pilots tell me they can't see into it. They fly over it, and it's a carpet of trees. You can't see into it.
I spent 20 years in the military looking and analyzing, maintaining various high complex medical devices and IT systems for the United States government. It's been very easy for me to transition that into the world of analytics for various topics. It could be pretty much anything, and I've taken kind of an affinity to the Bigfoot community from that perspective. And then doing the research and finding out that less than 30% of North America has been actually walked by man. What is in those areas of uninhabitable or untraversable environments? That's, to me, all the more alluring to find out what's in those areas. I just had a feeling that there was something more out there than what we know. Scholars of the Earth thought the Earth was flat at one point in time, and we are only surpassed by our utilization of technology and our understanding of science to leapfrog each other to be able to find things out that we don't know.
There's now always a place to go and see easily and interpret or digest data without reading pages and pages of reports. And a map puts those data points right in front of you. Maps tell a story immediately when you see them. I saw a parallel where I could use my mapping abilities and background to catalog and create a central repository for data relating to Bigfoot sightings and encounters, and make it measurable and quantifiable, and create a standard database or a data set where we can apply big data concepts and principles. From Alaska all the way to Australia, we have sightings that have been submitted. Washington is the #1 state, 866 sightings in Washington state alone. And then when you start to go down the coast to Washington, Oregon, California, Bigfoot thrives here.
Bigfoot's intelligent. That's what helps their being elusive. They're not a herd of elk. They're not a pod of whales. They're hominids that are intelligent, and they don't want to be seen. They're not going to be seen. Most instances are accidental when we have witness sightings. Patterns are the same wherever you go that I have found in the areas that I have researched. So south, southeast, and northwest. I have seen no difference in any kind of patterns. They're all individuals just like we are. You're going to have grumpy ones, happy ones, sad ones, fun ones, crouch, So I think it's more of a personality difference between different individuals than regions. They're all different shapes and sizes and color, just like we have different hair colors. They're red, brown, black, white, gray.
The fact that they have remained unrecognized or unestablished as a species simply rests on their rarity and other aspects of their reported behavior. They're nocturnal, they're solitary, they're far-ranging, they're very generalized. Those are characteristics of any animal species that render it very difficult to study, let alone trap or obtain a specimen in the wild.
The first encounter I had that I know for sure of, I was 6 years old. I was at my grandmother's house. I was outside playing in the dirt. I had sticks and things gathered up, and I was just sitting there on the ground playing when I heard somebody walk up. I thought it was my grandmother, but when I looked up, there was a young male, juvenile, standing there looking at me. And I looked at him for a little bit, and we stared at each other, and I go back and try to think of what was really going through my mind. Was I just looking at him and saying, man, that's a really hairy kid, or what was this? And pretty much I jumped up after he turned and walked away and went in and asked my grandmother, what was that? And all she said to me was, what do you think it was? And then later, we began to talk about it, and she began to tell me things about them, things that she had known all her life. I've been from coast to coast, and I've had many encounters. Some of them nothing more than them just letting us know. Some of them even more, where I actually interacted with them.
In 98, I became a police officer for Department of Defense in Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. And that's where I kind of started my law enforcement career. I was 21 years old. And I worked there for a couple of years, and then I moved out to the West End out in Forks, and I became a cop in La Push. And that's where I had my first Bigfoot encounter. I was actually coming into work on swing shift that day, and I was driving down La Push Road. Before you get to the reservation, you come to the Third Beach trailhead. And in fact, within a couple hundred yards, there was just tons of people on the beach around the corner. And I'm coming down the hill towards this, and I'm probably like 70 yards when I first see this thing. And then this just big figure just steps out of the brush and then it just kind of just glides across the road, and it doesn't even look at me. And it took about 4 steps, and it hit the fence, and it disappeared into the salmonberries. When I first saw it, I was a trained observer. I'm a police officer. I'm looking at this giant figure that was like that thick from chest to back. I mean, and huge, 8 feet tall, non-human gait, but humanoid. And I'm trying to classify what this thing is, but it's not real. And I know what it is, but what it is not real.
April 3rd, 1993, I was participating in a military training exercise, and this is an exercise where we use a lot of explosives in our training, utilizing rock quarries. We had 3 explosions to do that day in the morning. It was shortly after we set the fuses on that 3rd and final blast of the day, we would get in our vehicles. We'd convoy down to a safety staging area, wait for the explosion, and come back and check our work. I was situated as a passenger behind a driver of the 2nd Humvees. As we rounded this one corner, I had a direct line of the 2nd blast site. We came around that corner, I'm looking down there, and there's like these 3 very dark, very large figures standing three abreast of each other, watching us come down the road across the ravine from them. My first thought was, what are those people doing down there? There's not supposed to be civilians in the area. It took less than a second for me to realize what I was looking at were not people at all. The arms of these things went well below their knees, unbelievably long arms. Very broad shoulders, barreled chest, tapered waist. The legs were quite long as well. The one in the middle was, I would estimate, about 9 feet in height. And the 2 that flanked it, left and right, were probably 7.5 to 8 feet. The one in the middle, though, he stood there like a rock, just like a statue. It just did not flinch. But the 2 on either side of this larger one exhibited this behavior where they were shifting weight from foot to foot, and in the process rocking left to right like this. These long arms were swinging in front of their knees, and they did that the entire time I saw them. After say 25 seconds had elapsed, seemed like an eternity, we rounded another corner and I lost sight of them, and just at that I just slumped back in my seat, and I'm just trying to comprehend what I just saw.
July 1st, 2021, I'm in Idaho with my buddy Jim, which you'll see, here's his rig. Anyway, just a couple minutes ago, I saw a huge, giant Sasquatch standing right there. I only saw it for a second or two through the trees as we drove by, and then Jim backed up and he caught a glimpse of it, and then it was gone. We packed up camp and we started heading down the Forest Service road that follows a creek, and I said to Jim, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a Bigfoot family standing right in the middle of the road, and we kind of laughed. About a half mile down the road, I'm keeping an eye on the creek as we're driving real slow, about 15 miles an hour, and I see this huge figure, and I could see these huge shoulders. And I said to Jim, stop, I see a huge moose, back up. And I said, I see a huge Sasquatch, back up. And he goes, we backed up a little bit, and he says, oh, I see it too. It had stood up, and you could still see the massive shoulders, and the body came in a little bit, and it was just super big and super thick all the way to the water. I think it was standing in the creek. 1 second it's there, and in the blink of an eye, it's just not there anymore.
Really like the outdoors. I've always hunted, fished, camped, done it with my family growing up, being married and having kids, and we do the same thing. Been into archery pretty hardcore since I was about 14 years old. I've seen cougars in the woods, I've seen bear, deer, elk, moose, A lot of smaller game, fox and stuff like that. There's not too many animals in Oregon that I haven't seen. Labor Day weekend 2019. I'd been going over to this particular area in Eastern Oregon for a couple months, since about mid-May. I sat down by this water trough. As a hunter, you're always playing the wind. You always hunt with the wind in your face. So I was set up that night, wind in my face. And I'm kind of sitting there, and off to my left, I just catch a little bit of movement. So I kind of turn my eyes real slow and my head real slow over to look, and I see a head pop out and go right back. And so in my head I thought, oh, it's a hunter, another hunter. But I thought to myself, that's kind of weird. I never heard him come in, and I should have heard him come in. So I just kind of kept staring at that same spot, and then it stuck its head out. And it was what, doesn't exist, supposedly. Bigfoot sticks its head out, stares at me for probably 10 to 15 seconds, and then slowly pulls his head back. I just sat there dumbfounded, like, what in the hell did I just see? These things don't exist. I've been in the woods long enough. I know what I've seen. I knew it was not a bear. Absolutely 100% not a bear. So I sat there for, like I said, probably 5 minutes, just kind of trying to gather my thoughts and get my wits about me.
I've had a physical experience. I put a infrared alarm system up 7 feet, and it will only go off at 7 feet. At midnight, my alarm goes off. I'm like going through the ceiling. The dog's sitting up, and something's going around my tent, and it's going whoosh, whoosh, and you can hear footfall as it's going around my tent. The dog jumps in my face, goes down into the bottom of my mummy bag. I'm scratched up all the pieces. I'm laying there, and it stops behind me. All of a sudden, my tent starts getting pushed in. And then contact on the back of my head. Its palm was at the base of my neck. Its thumb right here. The top of the hand right here, as it's gently manipulating my head, pushing through my tent. So I go, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? I grabbed my keys from my truck and I broke the alarm system on it, and it backed away.
In June 2019, 7 loggers were working a place called the Wilson River Drainage. And they were in a closed area, which is all gated. The public does not get in at all. They were working with 2 very loud pieces of machinery. One was pulling logs up a hill, the other was loading them into trucks. Tremendous noise. One of them stops and says, "Who's that walking down the road towards us?" And about 300 yards away, they say a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, was walking down the road in midday. These are working loggers. They're not tourists. None of them had a camera. So the thing walked up to about 200 yards away, it stopped, looked at them, turned and walked away. They said it was 7 feet tall at least, 400 to 450 pounds, enormous, dark brown in color, swinging its arms, walking upright, and when it stopped like this with its hands out, looked at them, turned and walked away. We believe these things are nocturnal. So my theory there is the noise of the machinery got it up and moving, and it didn't know where the noise was coming from, which happens with wild animals very often. They can't pinpoint sound. And it started moving, saw the loggers, walked away. They call it the 7-man sighting. I got into the area with great difficulty. I got permission, went in there, spent a whole day, found some footprints, great big footprints, in a shallow stream bed nearby. This is 7 down-to-earth loggers with 20 or more years of experience. They're not mistaking something. They knew what they saw.
The way it started for me was my son actually ended up finding a single track deep in the icy mud outside the town of Thurston, Oregon. And I thought, well, maybe it's a hoax, maybe it's legit, but for us, it was a bigger question of what if. You know, I'd always loved a good mystery, and I thought, well, I'll introduce Jude to a really cool mystery. And so it just so happened that one of our neighbors filmed a movie about Bigfoot back in the 70s, loosely based on Patterson Gimlin. And he looked at the photo, which we had the mind to put a scale object next to show size. And he said, you know, it's interesting enough, it could be a hoax, but I know somebody you can talk to. And so I met this river guide, and he ended up telling me after our initial meeting that, you know, not only is Bigfoot real, but I've seen them several times. In fact, they come to my house, which was a whole new phenomena. I had no idea that you could be a witness multiple times and then be an extended experiencer, someone who quite literally has Bigfoot in their own backyard. That right there was really the trigger point for me to meet my first extended experiencer, which Daryl would end up becoming the ultimate extended experiencer.
When I first moved to the house down here below us, I would hear things at night up in these hills right here. It prompted me to look for someone that knew what those sounds might be, because they were so strange.
Daryl wanted to meet a local. He had just moved to town, and he didn't really know any locals here that were into such a strange subject or hobby. And so that's when we met, and we hit it off. And so we set up a kind of a date to meet up at his house, and that's when things kind of took off.
My first sighting was Christmas Day 1993. Myself and 2 nephews went for a drive looking for deer and had the usual 15-second roadside sighting. The thing was balled up in a root mass, stood up and looked at us, thoroughly annoyed. I was only about 20 to 30 feet away and stepped out of the blowdown in 2 steps, which was a feat in itself, and walked into the forest. I told the boys it was a big bear. I didn't even want to really think about it. That was that. The biggest thing is to stay awake at night. Some nights the forest is alive. It generally has to do with phases of the moon. And then we found out that with proper enticements, offerings, occasionally one of these things would come into camp.
Let me show you this map. I'll give you a little bit of background and provenance. Can I just hold it up like this? Yeah, this map was up somewhere around 12 years in the BLM office, Bureau of Land Management office in North Bend, Oregon. And I learned about it from federal and state officials that were conversant in that office. And so they would talk to me about it, and I would say, I'd sure like to see that map. And I kind of got nowhere, but there was one federal official, and I would work sometimes on his plumbing, and finally he sent me a screenshot of it, and this is it. And I think the following year they took it down when they found out that it had been disseminated. This is a collection of, among other things, stories where I am confided in by my plumbing customers in their homes, where they have a Bigfoot story that they would like to tell somebody, but they can't, and everyone understands why. There's a stigma about the whole thing in many circles, and so what I do very purposefully is I let my customers know, because they all know me, I'm their plumber, they've known me for many years, I let them know that I know that the Bigfoot are very real, It's not controversial, or it shouldn't be. Even if in the beginning they'll say, well, no, I don't believe in that stuff. It's the funniest thing. Maybe like a half hour later, as I'm doing their plumbing job and we're conversing, they'll say, well, here's what happened to me. And they'll tell me their story. And I have a whole collection of them in here. Many stories from very, very credible people in this area. Probably, I would say anecdotally, more of my customers have had some kind of a Bigfoot encounter than have had cougar encounters, because it's very rare to see a cougar. There's a family of Bigfoot that has lived for years at the county dump. When the lights go out and the gate is locked and there's no one there at the dump, the Bigfoot come in every night and there's a smorgasbord there, because they're the only animals that can get into the pit and back out. A local historian and cartographer, with considerable effort, gotten a few of the employees at the dump to admit that the Bigfoot are there. This right here is a photograph that was given to me of a trail cam. This is just maybe a half hour from here. It's a family, a very reputable family that owns land all over here, and they're hunters, and so they set out trail cams. And they took this photograph probably, I think, 10 years ago or so, and they never showed it to anybody. And then they decided to entrust it to their plumber. That would be me. There's a man and woman that I know here in town, and they're pretty well known, great people. They were camping with friends for 4 days on the Elk River. And he sent me a photograph that they got while they were there. He said, we watched this for a while, but it was an obviously a juvenile ape. It looked like an adult chimpanzee that was just hanging out up in a dead old growth tree. You can look at this and think, okay, either it's some sort of a gnarly growth on that tree that looks exactly like a chimpanzee. And he said, we watched it for a while, but he said the thing that was more remarkable was the noises that the apes would make at night. And he said they would make this, this loud gibberish and howling and barks and whistles and just all these noises they would make at night that was rather disconcerting.
This all began for me in 1971 when I was invited into the camp where these guys have been experiencing these horrific sounds around the camp. It was a nightly thing, and I started going up there. 8 miles in the wilderness, a very imposing area in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. And nobody up there was looking for Bigfoot. It just really wasn't that way. Because we had repeated visits up there, we started taking cassette tape recorders and recording the sounds.
There's 2 of them across the creek at the big rocks.
I spent a career in the Navy as a cryptolinguist, a translator of Russian, Spanish, and Persian. I played it, and I immediately knew. I could hear it, and I was stunned. There's a language here, and that is not a human being. The articulation of the phonemes are virtually the same as humans. They make the same sounds that we do, with about 6 or 7 extra ones that I've never heard a human make in any language. It would be impossible to fake something like this.
According to Dr. Lieberman, 1968 at Brown University, only humans have the apparatus for language like we have. That separates us from all the other animals in the kingdom of this earth. So that tells me something pretty significant. If they have the vocal mechanism for language, maybe they're got some human component to them.
Skepticism is a useful tool, but they'll say, well, why don't we have a skeleton? Why don't we have something? And there are several reasons for that. One is because the government isn't going to release the skeletons because it would be a disaster. As that same government official told me, we have to keep it as a legend. If we ever tried to pull the trigger on the Endangered Species Act, we can't, because you have to be able to count the population, and they are too intelligent and elusive to do so. And then we would end up with a bunch of primates out in the woods with guns hunting larger primates, and it would not go well. And so the government is well served by keeping it as a legend. The chaotic effect of the invocation of the Endangered Species Act over something like that would be catastrophic. It would be terrible. And so good governance and good management is to keep it as a legend.
There have been quite a few reports that I've gotten over the years of Bigfoot. I have gotten one, maybe two in the last few years that I thought were worth taking a closer look at. I've heard of people thinking that are mistaking bears for Sasquatch. I've never gotten any reports of Bigfoot or Sasquatch in my professional career that I determined was actually a bear. And that has happened in other cases in other parts of the Pacific Northwest.
I've heard questions from many people out there, skeptics, about where are the bones? Where are the bodies? Why haven't we found one? My major's forestry. I've got my degree in forestry. If anybody knows anything about decomp, animals, ants, whatever, things decompose so quickly. Small animals, they eat the bone for the calcium in the marrow. Okay, everything is consumed on an animal when it dies in the woods. 7 to 10 days, every trace is gone. Every trace is gone of any kind of an animal.
So it just speaks to the unlikelihood of finding remains of animals out in nature. Nature has a way of recycling those resources in a very efficient and very prompt manner.
Western culture wants a body. Biologists want a body. They want bones. They want a hair sample. All these sorts of physical, hard evidences beyond tracks. I think personally what it will take is contact. It'll take contact. It'll take someone who is willing to create a relationship with them and ask them to come forward. But I don't think that's going to happen. They hide for a reason. And not only do they hide for a reason, I'm on the fence about the fact that they only show themselves to people that they want to show themselves to.
Most of the time, if I get hair, it is usually hog hair, horse hair, deer, something of that nature. I personally have never received actual hair that could possibly be Bigfoot. A lot of footprints, handprints. My favorite investigation was back in 2001 at the water reclamation plant in the St. Johns River management area. They had a lot of activity going on there. I went out there and investigations as far as sightings, vocalizations. I had received a phone call saying, hey, we've got these handprints on the window that happened when this thing was looking in the window one night. My pictures were the handprints, and in some cases you could actually see the hair where it pressed against the window. The handprint isn't the full hand, it was looking in the window, so it was kind of like had bent fingers. But I got good palm and thumbs and the tips of the fingers. In some cases, it wasn't just it was like he moved his hands, okay, or he leaned against the window so you could see the hair impressions on the window. This is my favorite. This is obviously skin with hair impressions on it. The handprints and the imprints I received, a lot of oil in them. This is Debbie, who was my witness. She's pointing to way up here where the handprints were. And the handprints were roughly 8 feet because it moved around and everything. She worked graveyard. She came in from the back warehouse of the shop into the reception area, and there it was looking at the computer screen, watching the Windows little logo thingy going on it. And then when she walked in and saw it, and it saw her movement, then it kind of stood up and then took off.
One of my principles that I work with is the Hukin-Sullivan principle, that you have to spend 200 hours feet on the ground in a reasonably good area to have an encounter of any kind, or possibly a sighting. Jim Hukin was a state of Oregon biologist. Jack Sullivan was a science teacher. These guys knew their stuff, and they were very active from the late 60s up through the early 90s. One claimed 12 sightings, the other one claimed 13. But they all had the same characteristics of sightings. They were very brief, they were very clear, they knew exactly what they're seeing, and they did not have time to raise their cameras up, or if they did get their camera up, it was too dark to take a decent picture. And they refused to engage in blob squatch. Blob squatching is these goofy pictures that people have of Bigfoot that are shadows and branches waving and all kinds of stuff.
We just got glimpses every once in a while, and people want to know why we didn't get a picture. That might be one of the questions that's going to get asked, and I get asked that all the time. And we really tried to get pictures, but these things seemed to outfox us. We underestimated what they were, underestimated them thoroughly. They move inhumanly fast. The one I saw was shooting down through the trees to two other ones that were making sounds down here. We feel like it was an adolescent and a mother. That's what we think, a family of three.
This event that I'm going to talk about now has to do with a nest that I found while I was at work with two other people. And this looked just like a bird's nest. It was on a hillside that was about 60 to 70%. And what built this nest had opposable thumbs. But when animals make beds, they slide everything out to the bare soil. So you've got this mound of debris around it, but you have a clear down to mineral soil. But what I found here was tree branches that were woven together. These branches were broken off tree, 2, 3 trees, whatever, in the area, and they used that as their building material. And everything was intertwined all the way around. So I knew what built this had thumbs. Could have been a hunter. I found hairs that were anywhere from 1 inch to about 2 inches long. These hairs had multicoloration to them. They were light at the bottom, and then they got brown, blonde, and then there were a few that were dark. So it was multicolored. And I showed them to my partners, and they were just flabbergasted. They were just it was out of this world what we were looking at.
In the Mount Hood National Forest, there are billions, literally billions of broken branches. They're caused by all kinds of stuff. So occasionally you may find a trunk or something of that nature that's been twisted and braided by a Bigfoot, probably as a territorial sign.
All right, right back in there.
Oh, yeah. Whoa.
Yeah, it's
That is, whoa.
So these were brought here. I mean, you can see how they were all placed.
This is incredible.
Here we go, look at this.
It's due north.
Yeah. When people say they see tree structures, they see symbols that mean something that is made with hands and order. It takes a lot more for me. It takes this to say, you know, there's nothing here that would cause 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 logs all going the same direction, and then this fencing pattern.
Uh-huh.
What if it was not due north? What if it was slightly away from due north to northwest to northeast, but it's exactly due north on the 0?
It comes to a point. Like it is pointing to something.
You know, these have been brought here.
Right. No, it's very obviously been brought. Like this isn't pushed over. I don't think this is pushed over.
No.
It's not. See? There's
Yeah.
no root system here. This is not pushed over. It's been placed.
So who knows what exists around this area? I mean, it takes time.
This one is actually intricately interwoven with this one. You have to take steps to get to this.
You know, you just kind of feel like something
You can't help but
thinks
feel
this
like
is important.
this, yeah.
Or they did think it was important to build this. I don't think hunters built the blind here. I don't think hunters would go through this.
Honestly, think what we're dealing with is a relic hominid of some sort. We've had Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, slightly different subspecies, if you will, of hominid.
Bigfoot is going to be part of our genus. And it's gonna scare some people. It's gonna excite other people. I'm gonna be excited. And I don't think anybody can really predict what's gonna happen. It's gonna be a free-for-all. It's gonna be a little unnerving, probably.
I didn't know what they were when I first got into this. I would read the books, and they would say, you know, we all branched off from the same. And there's different branches as the generations progress. But to me, we're all the same. And they're the purest human on this earth yet. And what I mean by that is that they're living the life as they were given it. They are living as they have from the very beginning. So they are the purest form of human left on this earth.
Their survival depends on us not knowing about them. We bring disease, we bring violence, we bring lack of understanding, we bring lack of compassion. And then I'm on the fence about, can we actually hurt them? I don't think we can hurt them per se, but I do think we can destroy their environment. We're destroying our own environment, let alone theirs.
Frankly, I feel their discovery is inevitable. There's no question, as a living being, they're also a dying being. And whether they die by age or disease or injury, they're going to die one time or another. And I think it's inevitable extremely rare but inevitable, we will find a body. As difficult it is to find a living Bigfoot, somewhere out there, there's a body.
I know a lot of people think it comes down to the spotted owl situation we had back in the 90s. So if there's this undiscovered, primate living in the woods now, and okay, now they say, yeah, it's here. Well, how much land do we have to set aside for him? So does that affect logging? Is that going to affect, recreational areas? Is that going to affect hunting grounds? What's the grand scheme that it's going to affect? It very well could be a cover-up. It very well could be.
I think they know that more than we do. I don't think they want to put money into it. As far as they're concerned, it's something out there, and it's not going to, as long as they don't show it attention, it's not going to affect the economic portion of government and states and cities, because that's their main concern. Not as much science. It's how it's going to affect the economy of their particular area.
Let's say that Bigfoot was discovered in the state, and what was determined is that there's an existing population of them here, and that the animal is an indigenous animal in Oregon. In that case, jurisdiction for management of the animal would fall with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. The animal would be listed under the protected animals list through the Oregon administrative rules. It's possible that some other agency or some other entity or maybe an individual could petition with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for that animal to be included in the federal endangered species list, in which case a significant amount of protections would be afforded the animal. If there's an undocumented humanoid living in North America, and obviously with the thousands of encounters that's occurred since prehistory, that's well established that there is. I mean, it means that they would dedicate and exhaust all available resources to find out as much information as possible about that undocumented humanoid. It's by definition a threat to national security. They would use all resources and exhaust all of them to find out everything they possibly could about it. I have no doubt whatsoever that they've done that. I can tell you that no Bigfoot researcher that I know of has been contacted by a government agent that wanted to know the information that they had or what they knew, which tells me that the information that they already have is much greater than anything that we know.
I do know that the U.S. government has knowledge of the Sasquatch. I ended up becoming an intelligence officer in the United States Army, and I worked specifically with the 2nd Ranger. I do know for a fact that the 2nd Ranger had, on many occasions, had to take out a few Sasquatch just for public safety. And sometimes people aren't paying attention to what the forest is telling them. I personally didn't go out in the field with them, but I saw the after-action review reports. And I do know, just from the ones that I saw, there were 4 taken, and they were also taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for autopsy. I don't think it's really a national security thing. I think it's more of a financial thing. I think they're worried about the financial impact of these things could have to small communities around the country.
It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life and most frightening thing I've ever experienced in my life, all in one bundle. I can't seem to keep my eyes out of the trees when I'm here, I just want to see it again so bad I can't handle it. Trying to tell the story and put it in perspective for someone to understand is really hard to do. It's just something that I wish everyone that wanted to see Bigfoot or was curious could see it for themselves.
That's why I think opening up our story that we've had would be able to express that, what people may think that's not something that's real might be able to be like, okay, I can actually ease my mind a little bit and be like, that what I saw was real.
The way it pulled its little one, its young behind it with its arm,
in a
protective fashion was just, it was crazy. My first thing I thought was like, this thing's protecting something, and it's not, it's just, it was, I mean, I can't even put it in words. It was so unreal.
There's nothing out there that I have experienced out in the wilderness that can move and have the parental effects that they, you know, had towards its own.
Protecting its young like a human, like I would, like pull my daughter behind me in a bad situation, you know.
It was like a dark cinnamon.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was not black. It was not what I've heard people, it was not what you hear every day from people. Like, this thing was cinnamon colored. It had every feature that like you would see like if you went to a zoo and saw a gorilla.
The arm length was basically double of what our arm length was.
Yeah, it was to its knees. Below its knees almost.
Easily. Once they seen us, and once we kind of locked eyes for that, what seemed to be an eternity, they moved off the logs and they kind of hid along the tree line there.
You could see through the trees. You could see that thing moving, but once it got behind the trees, there was nothing. It was like it just disappeared in thin air.
It almost was in the feeling that they wanted us to see it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that if we did have the equipment, the cameras, anything like that,
we wouldn't have seen it.
Not at all.
I think if we would have had our cameras rolling, we wouldn't have seen it.
They would have never allowed us to.
Chad and Austin were going to come out here and film a survival YouTube video, and it was going to be like a 24-hour overnight thing, and they didn't want me to come pick them up. They wanted to do it all on their own. And when they went to go call me at midnight, first I was upset, and I said, no, I'm not going to come and pick you guys up, and hung up. They called back, and when I met them down at the bottom of the road, I could just see it in Chad's eyes. And in the 12 years we've been together, I've never seen him not scared. I definitely am a strong believer in Bigfoot now, and it's something that I know Chad and Austin will never forget, as well as myself.
There are many aspects to what you would consider, quote, a Sasquatch experience. One of them is unbelievable fear. When you talk to somebody who's had an experience, most often they're going to tell you they have this fear that is just, they can't even describe it. Another is out of context emotions. We don't have a mental construct for these kinds of beings because we're not taught this. So we're not open to it. We're only told what exists and what does not exist. So our belief system is such a way that if something comes in to our context and leaves, then we don't have a mental construct for it. A lot of people cannot handle that psychologically, mentally, or emotionally because it challenges everything that they've been taught.
Making eye contact with something that doesn't exist, you just don't know what to think. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to go talk to because, I don't want to be the crazy one.
I've had these experiences that have really affected me, and I talk to grown men who will stand there and cry over what they've seen. They won't go back in the woods to hunt. There was one gentleman who was a foreman for a construction crew, and he wouldn't go back to work for a few days because of what he saw, and his wife said he never missed a day of work in his life before that. He knows what black bears look like. He knows what's in the forest, and he says he saw a Bigfoot and he saw it up close.
I start to feel like betrayal, I guess I would say, because I start to think about the fact that I'm a trained professional, a trained observer. I just happen to see something that's not supposed to be real, and my whole world is in disarray at this moment, because I'm driving away from this thing, having to deal with a realization of something that isn't supposed to be real, that I just happen to have an encounter with real as day. How come I just had to see this thing? And I'm never told about it before, only as a fairy tale. I never believed in them or anything like that.
My name is Dr. Michael Adams, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I trained conservatively at the University of Miami and Yale University School of Medicine. I served in the Army Reserve as in the Medical Corps, and finally, primarily my private practice, and to this date, probably over 90,000 direct clinical patient hours. We all have psychological defenses. They allow us to go through the world and navigate our experiences. So everybody has them. Anybody who has normal interactions in the world has to have psychological defenses. They're neither good or bad, they just are. So when we talk about rationalization, that's where we take an event that's happened in our life and we just rationalize it. For example, we see something strange out in the woods and we go, no, it can't be that. It must be this. And they discard their original impression and rationalize it. And I couldn't have seen what I just saw, right? So there's rationalization, and then there's suppression and repression. Suppression is a conscious act where I just saw something, I experienced something, but it's disturbing to me. So I am not going to talk to other people about it, and I'm not going to even maybe admit it much to myself. I don't want to relive what I just experienced. Repression, on the other hand, is an unconscious process where we push it so deeply down where we're not aware of it. We don't even think about it. So you may have a subset of people out there who experience Bigfoot, Sasquatch, if you will, who really don't remember the experience in some cases, or remember it and push it down. So there could be a subset of people out there, again, who have seen this, but you would never know about it because their defenses kicked in and protected them.
If someone's seen Bigfoot and they want to recall more information, absolutely, hypnosis gives us that tool. A lot of things happen when we have a traumatic experience or we have an emotional experience. Our mind is recording all of this stuff, and it happens rapidly. So if we can slow it down using hypnosis, we can say, okay, what happened? Stop that. Freeze frame it. Zoom in. We can do all those things. The unconscious mind can really do all those things. So yes, we can get a lot more details. And if it's traumatic or emotional, there's a bunch of information. We have different minds that have different functions. There's the conscious mind. It's what we call volatile. It's the one that says, oh, I've got an appointment, I need to be there. Or is this something that I should be watching or doing? It's that questioning part of us. It's also the part that says, let's go have fun. 95% of your perceptions and your behaviors are controlled by your unconscious mind. So everything that's going on, every moment of the day, your unconscious mind is recording. And it is literally filing it. When we go to sleep, the stuff that has value gets shuffled to long-term memory. If it had an emotional component to it or a traumatic component to it, it gets shuffled deliberately into long-term because we need to know that it has value. If that experience was traumatic, created fear, we need to know about it so that if it happens again, we're prepared.
Oh, there he goes.
We see an event that is possibly even traumatic, but we see a profound event. What we're likely to do is take a still frame and a moving shot of that experience, and we're going to archive that in our brains. And it gets seared in the sense that it is permanent. It's a permanent image because it's so profound for us and it's so out of the box for us. So we put it in our minds, we park it there, and we will keep that seared, if you will, in our memories for the rest of our lives.
I really obsessed on it for like 30 days, 30 or a few months almost. I was like looking for answers, you know what I mean? And finally I just, with my kids, I just got distracted in life and my wife and stuff. It just kind of slipped away, and I kind of just, anytime we'd go out for a trip in the mountains or down fishing by the river, it would pop right back up in my mind. I'd look down the river or something like this, and I'd just like see a flashback of, almost like picturing something standing down there. It could really put somebody in a bad state of mind if they were to experience what I experienced. It can be very traumatizing.
Like Chad said, me and him talk to each other when we get into those moments, it...
Yeah, 11, 12 o'clock at night,
It don't matter what time it is.
Ring the phone,
Because it almost made you feel like you were going to go insane. it'll never leave you. You will always have that with you. You will always remember that moment.
One of my biggest takeaways from starting the Bigfoot Mapping Project is how many people have had experiences that, because of places where they couldn't access somewhere to report or somebody to talk to, or they didn't feel comfortable, now they have it. So the biggest takeaway would be that it's a big anthropological movement. It's just not just about Bigfoot. It's about the impact it's had on the culture, and you can take that away from the stories people have to tell. When I set out starting the project, I did not expect to get such emotional and impactful reports. I expected people to be pretty dry.
I will say that a good percentage of them, there's a level of underlying fear because they don't know what this is. It's making noise, it's moving past them, or they see it and it's moving away. It's not something that our unconscious mind or our conscious mind is really set to register. So they can start out a bit fearful. They can start out with a little bit of hesitation. I've had people go from that to awe, that, oh my gosh, this is an incredible creature. That it's amazing. I had one client talk about how muscular it was and how broad its shoulders were and how it's like just was in awe of this incredibly majestic creature. I had another client that I worked with who actually began to cry. And I said, what's happening now? And his response was so beautiful. He says, I realize that I will never see these again. That was powerful.
I don't entertain a lot of motives when it comes to skeptics because they're impure. I mean, if people really want to know something and they're skeptical because they doubt, that's natural. I can deal with that. But if people want to mock and they want to, have their punchline and just say, oh, you didn't do your homework, you're lazy. Well, they don't know what I know, and that's good enough for me. I know what I know, and it's made me a better person. This isn't everybody's journey. Not everybody's supposed to take the red pill. And you have to let those people go. You can't force this message down their throat. And sometimes they're skeptics, but sometimes they're a-holes.
If you want to ignore the thousands of reports that are out there, you can do that. But does that mean everybody's lying? Everybody's screwed up? What does that mean about all these people that are saying this all over the world, all over the United States, all over the Pacific Northwest now? People are saying they see these things. Open up your minds because they're out there.
As you start utilizing the data and you start seeing the data tell the story, the whole story unfolds right before your eyes, and it just becomes evident. This is real. It can't all be making it up. The data elements, like who did you tell? How long did you go before you actually shared that encounter? Many people go many, many years. Why? If they saw something and they felt like it had to be shared and they were hoaxing, why would they wait 15 to 20 years or not even tell their spouse? But now you're able to pull that information out of them, and you see that direct correlation between something that happened in Maine all the way to something that happened in Southeast Texas. And that, to me, is why the data is going to tell the truth every single time.
People like to control their world or their perception of the world. So something that's outside the range of their perception or experience, some people will reject, and sometimes in a militant manner. And sometimes they'll degrade somebody or demean somebody who's had that experience. And I'll tell you what underlies the denial. Fear. They're fearful of something they can't identify, understand, or control. A person who's too rigid in their worldview is crazy, because they can only see the world through one finite lens. We call those people sometimes psychotic, because they've lost touch with reality. They only see the world in one simple finite way. Emotional well-being, mental health is strongly associated with flexibility, the ability to think outside the box, to experience different people, different events, different circumstances with not such a critical eye, but an open eye. Those are mentally healthy people, because they see things as possible.
I'm not out to prove he's there. I know he's there, and that's good enough for me. You're never going to convince everybody in the world until there's one laying there on a table or, one caught. I'm definitely not going to be the one to put one on a table, and I'm definitely not going to be the one to try and catch one. And to be honest, even if I get a picture, and I know there's pictures out there because I've seen them of actual Bigfoot, why share it? Because somebody's going to say, oh, it's fake, it's makeup, it's this, it's a mask. Even if I had absolute proof, 100% proof, I don't think I'd share it.
Bigfoot is a great example of something, once again, that people can't categorize. So who are the people out there who are saying, let's investigate this, let's take a closer look at this, let's see if there's some science behind it, some explanation behind it. If you're in the mainstream in terms of science, or a professional, if you will, you're taking a risk because you're willing to say, I'm going to pursue this, and I'm not going to really pay attention to the naysayers. I'm not going to be put down by them. And those people are truly pioneers. And that's been true throughout history, whether it's religion, politics, medicine, science, whatever human endeavor, people take risks and chances. And one of the risks and chances they take is that people may think they're foolish. So people who are willing to say, yes, I'm going to get ridiculed for this, but I'm going for it anyway, those are truly pioneers. They're transformational people who are willing to say, let's take a shot at this, let's see what's out there. And that's the kind of person that we should celebrate.
Wednesday, 9:01 p.m. Dad, I don't know if you can hear me. This is Rachel. I don't know how good my kids are. Very mad. I got 2 kids. I don't know how good they are yet. I have to wait till I get home. Call me later when you get there, but I love you. Bye.
10 years ago, I was diagnosed with melanoma cancer. Me and God, we're good buddies, and I asked for help, and he sent me people to tell me what to do. And so I went to have a melanoma cancer removed off the top of my head, but they didn't get it all, and I was eventually diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that was a death sentence. Now fast forward, I'm going to St. Mary's, Alaska with my wife to see my grandchildren, and my daughter, Rachel, and son-in-law, possibly for the last time. The day that I saw the Bigfoot, we get into the boat and we're motoring up the Andrevsky River, which flows into the Yukon. We fished all morning, caught nothing, so we found a sandbar and unloaded the kids. And then I said, let's go after steelhead. I had a steelhead on earlier that day, and so my son-in-law and I alone jumped in. We went downriver, and he pointed up the hill, and he says, what is that? He whispered, what is that? And I said, that's a big old brown bear. No, what is that? Then it stood up, and when he stood up, he took 2 great big steps and squatted back down and started eating. In my mind, as a non-believer, I'm thinking, a bear can't do that. He finally passed me the binoculars, and when I looked, I saw fingers this long with the thumb way back here. And I thought, a bear? That's a Bigfoot! And I was just stunned. And so I handed him the binoculars, and then I hear this. Oh! Now we're both believers. And the big guy, that big, beautiful creature, stood up and turned and looked straight at me. I cannot tell you what that did to me. I saw grill wrinkles right here. I saw a nose twice as wide as mine. I saw a bare face, a bald forehead with a raised eyebrow ridge right here, no eyebrows. The hair started right up here towards the top of his head and went all the way to his ankles. The hair started, I think, at his knuckles and went all the way down. I couldn't see hair on the fingers. His shoulders were about this wide, and his body was so muscular, so incredible. Not much of a neck. We could see it from the front, but from the side and the back you couldn't see it at all. His head was about twice as wide as mine. The eyes were up a little higher than normal human eyes, and they were either solid black or solid black and brown. I'm not sure which. And he just looked at us. You know, our eyes just locked, and my jaw hit the bottom of the boat. His stare, wow. Well, after about 10 seconds, he turned and knelt and laid down, and then we're trading the binoculars back and forth. I'm wanting to see him again so bad my teeth hurt. If you look out here in the field, there's cows, and I was a cow milker, and I sang to the cows. I taught my kids to sing to the cows, and so I started singing to this Bigfoot. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Got through the verse once, and he didn't stand up, so I thought maybe he can't hear me, so I'm raising my voice slowly as I go into the second verse, and I finally got right to, you make me happy when skies are gray, and he stood up. I was elated. Eventually, after about 10 minutes, we watched him walk up that tundra hillside. Great big giant steps. He walked up that mountain faster than I could run down. It was, my son-in-law said, look at that. No human can walk on the tundra like that. And he went over the hill, and the last thing we saw was the top of his head going down the other side of the hill. We finally turned around and went back to the boat. Most solemn experience of my life, going down that river. Me and God were talking. Thank you, God. I'm diagnosed to die. Thank you for letting me see such an incredible thing and to experience this in the last time of my life.
It's hard to go through cancer with somebody you love, and it's like the ups and the downs, and he was really obsessed with looking up treatments, and it was all he talked about, and it was so like discouraging. And after he saw the hairy man, his entire world changed.
Of course, that was 10 years ago. I am God's miracle.
He was unbelievably excited. He came back into where we had our little camp. The kids and I were building a fire, trying to cook hot dogs, and he comes back just throwing his arms up. He's like, get back in the boat. We just saw Bigfoot. I thought that they were just messing with us, and I'm like, I'm not going anywhere until I've eaten my hot dog. And he actually started trying to hike down the river towards where they had seen the Bigfoot. Of course, this is Alaska, so it's bear country, and you can't go. And I had to go chase him. I'm like, Dad, you don't have a bear gun. It's not safe. Like, you will die. He wanted to go find the tracks. He wanted to go see it again. It's pretty hard to walk through the tundra. We had to like break trail, and it was hard. We had to climb up the bank. We had to find our way through the shrubs and out to where this tree. And I do have a picture of my dad standing next to the tree. And the way he told the story, the hairy man had been taller than the tree.
I have to come back here to Vernal, Utah. And so I knew that the only time I would be able to talk to anybody about a Bigfoot was at the airport. I walk in, there's about 30, 35 people there. I've seen a Bigfoot, of any of you? I wanted answers. I wanted knowledge, and I got 5 stories. I'm diagnosed to die. I might as well let it go. Tell people it's true. I became an interviewer, and I have hundreds of Bigfoot stories, 500 or 600. When he was walking away, I called out to him, "You're the most beautiful creature in the world. Please don't go." He looked more human. I was hoping he could understand me, but he never turned to look back, not once. My purpose in sharing this story with you is to bless those who have not been able to share their story and have been mocked and ridiculed and belittled.
In St. Mary's, everybody had a hairy man story. Everybody knew somebody had seen hairy man or had seen them themselves. It's a very small community. It wasn't like hairy man or Bigfoot was a myth. Like, it was just one of those things that they were just there. Our family was the only white or Cossack family. My ex was a trooper. We were posted out there for most of the kids' younger lives. My dad, after he left, after his Bigfoot sighting, never talked about anything else. My ex was a pilot, and he had a private plane, and he would always ask if we had gone out to look for Bigfoot, and we never did because we weren't as passionate, and we had our lives and were busy. So we were getting ready to come home. It was like, I can't go home and see my dad if I haven't gone out and looked. So that one day, it was like, well, do you want to go fly and look? So I got my little camera, and I got some cool wildlife shots of like some moose. I got some cool landscape shots, but we didn't really expect to see anything. And I got airsick. I switched my camera to landscape, took a few pictures, and then I just had put my camera down in my lap, and I was airsick. I started flying towards a hill, and my ex was looking. He could see something over here, and I wasn't looking at it because I was done. I was looking over his shoulder, so his head was kind of turned. We're flying towards the hill, and I'm like, there is a dude walking on that hill. And it just, it was tiny, and we get a little bit closer, and I'm like, that is a dude in a red hoodie. And we get a little bit closer, and I start hitting the pilot. Holy crap, that's a freaking Bigfoot. Only I swore. Sorry, Mom. I said the SH word, but and you don't really want to punch your pilot, and he's like, where? And I'm like, right there. As we initially flew up, it was walking and it was moving fast, but it didn't even look at us. But then when my ex spun the plane to try and get a photo of it, it threw its arms up, and I felt bad. I felt like we scared it, like harassing the wildlife. I don't know, but I felt like we scared it, and then it really started to run. And it was trying to get over to the patch of alders where my ex thought he had seen movement, going over there, and that's where it was headed. And then after we scared it, it really started to move. And I was pretty stunned at the speed that it made it over the side of this mountain, because it's really hard to walk on the tundra. You go out and you walk on a big sponge, like a big, humongous, massive sponge, and it's all wet and tufty, and you can't really see where it's going to pit, where it's going to have holes, and it's very uneven, and it's difficult, and it's tiring, and I was really surprised at how gracefully it moved. It reminded me of the moose, with its fluidity and its grace. And that really surprised me. It didn't look like a man running. It did look more, the arms were longer, the gait was more bent over, you know. It was so graceful, and it looked like it lived out there. It didn't look like, I mean, think about how hard it would be to run in a costume on that terrain. I've had people ask me if it was a guy in a suit, and it's a good question. But for me, I think not, because first of all, if you're going to pose in a monkey suit in Alaska, you're going to get shot. It wouldn't be practical economically for the people who are living out there. And then if you're going to try and commit a fraud like that, you'd want to be on the river, on the bank between St. Mary's and Mountain Village, or like near Bethel. You'd want to be seen where you'd be out on the river. And this was 10 miles upriver, 10 miles inland away from everything. So 20 miles away from anybody. So it would have to be like just a person who wanted to run around on a mountain in a Bigfoot suit, which is pretty illogical, I think. Plus, they would have had to have been dropped off by plane. To get to where he was, he couldn't have gotten there just on foot, just by himself. He would have had to have chartered a plane, because we certainly didn't see any planes on the ground in the area, and been dropped off. And my ex had worked all day and hadn't been out flying, and then we went out and we flew, and he didn't go back and make any. So, like, I know it wasn't my ex. I don't know what kind of a mental case would just be out there for fun, because there wasn't anybody out there to see him. So my ex didn't want me to post my pictures on Facebook, or because of potential, the stigma, and he didn't want it to affect his ability to do his job. I watched this beautiful animal, so humanoid as well, that it's like, it makes you wonder about their sentience, or how aware are they have the ability to survive and to cover up their existence. It denotes a great deal of intelligence. For me, there was a moral responsibility. Like, do you share? Do you talk about it? And then, like, they've done fine. And if they're living, like, completely off the grid, completely, like, with us as a society, largely unaware of them, do they need us knowing about them? They seemed too intelligent for me to, like, consider them as, like, something you could go out and hunt like an animal. There are a lot of open-hearted, open-minded people. There are a lot of beautiful people who are curious, and I guess not so arrogant to think that we know everything about the world that we live in, and I kind of think it's the hubris of man to think that we have it all figured out, and that we're the most intelligent, and we know everything, and if it doesn't fit into the little box. And so there are a lot of people who that's just who they are, and that's just how they're going to think. It's the way their brains process information, and that's fine. But then there are a lot of people out there who are curious and full of faith and want to believe. And I talk to the people who are interested and want to hear about it, and I just don't really bother. I don't bother trying to tell somebody who is out to disbelieve. If they've already got their mind made up against, I was that person. Like, did not believe. I just thought it was a myth. You know, it wasn't until I had my own experience. Tell the people who want to know. Tell the people who are open and full of faith, and let the people who aren't open yet come to that point on their